Jake Walker's previous denim jacket was ripped apart by the December wind like a knife. He hunched over the stroller, shielding his 2-year-old daughter, Ella, from the icy gusts as they waited for the crosswalk signal. The streets of Cleveland glittered with holiday lights, but none of that magic touched Jake's world. He was a 33-year-old single dad, 3 months unemployed, barely scraping by doing odd jobs. Jake had struggled ever since Ella's mother had passed away during childbirth to keep them afloat. In order to provide Ella with food, he had sold his truck, downsized to a small studio, and skipped meals. Still, he wore his dignity like armor, rusty and dented maybe, but intact. That night, Jake spotted her for the 3rd time in a week, huddled beneath a bus stop bench, arms wrapped around herself, eyes closed but never asleep. The woman looked mid-40s, face pale, lips blue. A half-torn backpack sat beside her, clutched like it held her last breath. Most people walked past without a glance, but Jake couldn't. He was unable to leave. "Ma'am," he said, kneeling beside her. "It's too cold out here. There's a shelter." "Full," she mumbled without opening her eyes. "They're all full." He hesitated. Every rational voice screamed that he had enough on his plate. That inviting a stranger into their home was risky. Dangerous even. But then Ella sneezed behind him, a tiny, wet sound that cut him to the core. "I've got a couch," he said, "and soup. Not much else, but it's warm." The woman looked up, eyes rimmed red. "You don't even know my name." Jake gave a soft grin. "I don't need to." Her name was Mara. She had lost her husband 2 months prior, a sudden heart attack in the middle of a snowstorm. No insurance, no savings. They'd lived in a rented room above a bookstore. When the landlord found out she couldn't pay, he changed the locks while she was at the hospital. She came back to nothing but a bag of clothes left on the porch. In Jake's cramped apartment, she moved with quiet gratitude, washing dishes and folding laundry like she was repaying a fortune. Within a week, Ella was clinging to her like a second mother. Jake also experienced something new in his bones for the first time in years. Peace. The knock came next. It was a Wednesday morning. 2 officers. Mara stood behind Jake, holding Ella, her face pale again. "Ma'am," one officer said, "we have a warrant for your arrest." Jake instinctively moved in between them. "What? For what?" He was heartbroken by the response. Mara had missed a court date, something about unpaid debts and an old dispute over a joint credit account her late husband had opened. The court summons had been sent to the old address, so she had no idea about it. Jake drove her to court himself the next day. He wore his only collared shirt. Mara held Ella the whole time in the waiting room, trembling. Then they called her name. Additionally, a strange event occurred. The judge froze. His eyes scanned the courtroom, landing on Jake. "You brought her here?" he asked slowly. Jake gave a nod. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She just didn't have anywhere to get the notice. The judge leaned forward, expression unreadable. "What's your name, sir?" "Jake Walker." A beat of silence passed. Amazingly, the judge stood after that. The courtroom stilled. Even the clerk stopped typing. "I knew a Walker once," the judge said, voice thick. "James Walker, Vietnam vet. Saved my life when our convoy was attacked in 1969. I've spent 50 years wishing I could thank him." Jake took a breath. "James was my father, sir." The judge slowly sat back down. "Well then, let's take a moment before we proceed." Mara was discharged without incident. The judge described the case as a bureaucratic mess when it was dismissed for lack of sufficient cause. But it was more than that. It was a moment of full-circle grace. A son, raised by a war hero, had quietly carried forward the legacy of compassion. A woman, nearly crushed by the system, found safety because of a kindness her husband had shown half a century earlier. Months passed. Jake got a steady job at the judge's friend's repair shop. Mara enrolled in community college to become a nurse. They co-parented Ella like it was the most natural thing in the world, not bound by blood, but by choice. They weren't a conventional family, but they were a real one. Jake took Ella and Mara to the same bench at the bus stop each Christmas thereafter, when the city's lights came on. They'd lay a blanket and a thermos of soup beside it, just in case someone else needed a second chance. Because sometimes the most extraordinary stories are revealed by the smallest acts of kindness, and sometimes a judge stands in silence, not out of authority but out of awe. That winter melted into spring, and with it, so did some of the heaviness Jake had carried for years. Mara moved from the couch to the pull-out bed, and eventually, they found a 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, peeling paint, a stubborn faucet, but it had sunlight in the mornings and a little fenced yard where Ella could run barefoot in the grass. Now Mara cooks frequently. Jake came home to the smell of lentil stew or baked chicken, and Ella's giggles bouncing off the walls. The three of them were moving in a quiet, easy, unspoken rhythm. Jake never asked Mara to stay. She said she wouldn't. However, neither of them went. Jake found Mara on the porch in June, barefoot, staring at the stars after putting Ella to sleep. She asked him without looking at him, "You ever think how close we came to never meeting?" "All the time," he replied, settling beside her. Mara turned toward him, eyes glassy in the porch light. "I used to think the world was full of people who wouldn't care, but now I think it's just full of people waiting for someone else to care first." Jake didn't say anything. He just reached out, took her hand, and held it. The next morning, a letter arrived. It was from the judge. A handwritten note was inside. "Jake, your father would be proud. I was reminded by you that justice is more than just rules. It's a choice, a daily one. Thank you for making it." Below the note was a printed scholarship form addressed to Ella Walker, to be held in trust until she turned 18. Jake stared at the letter for a long time. Then he walked into the living room where Mara was dressing Ella for daycare. "She's going to be okay," he whispered. Mara looked up. "Yeah, she really is." There were still bills, late nights, and occasional instances of fear, so it wasn't a fairy tale ending. But they had a home now, not just a roof. They had each other. And in a world where kindness often feels like a risk, Jake had taken one, and in return, found not just redemption, but a future stitched with hope.